Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Today, I'm just going to be quickly talking about our role as part of the team developing the mobility element for the township of South Orange Village of their master plan update, and how we use Streetlight as part of that. You know, for a long time, the focus in our industry, in the transportation industry, was to move cars and trucks as fast as we could through areas, and you know that's been changing, and not even because of COVID. So we are always looking for a way to create a better balance between vehicles and the other modes, bikes, peds, transit, and now even the micromobility of scooters and e-bikes. You know, so in this era of, again, not even because of COVID, of a lack of funding for projects, we've been moving towards data-driven analysis, and you know that's it, and you know it's a way for public agencies to determine, you know, are the funds being allocated, you know, are they being used in the most efficient and effective manner? Are they being used in the right places? So, you know, the access to all this data really helps us focus our efforts and investments to where they're needed. Pam, next slide, please. So just very quickly about Sam Schwartz. We are a national firm, as you can see from the slide. We have 8 offices, with 3 in the tri-state area. Our headquarters is in New York City, with offices in Jersey City as well as White Plains in Westchester County. You know, the thing that surprises me about this firm is that we do work all over the country, even though we may not necessarily have an office there. So, you know, I think that speaks to the types of services and expertise that we can provide. And part of that is we've developed a team of data scientists that help the engineers and planners distill and paint the picture and you know, help us work through all the data to help understand what we need to do and where we need to do it. Pam, next slide. So the you know, the master plan, you know, really is intended to develop a long-term vision for mobility needs, and in this case for the town of South Orange. You know, and what we understand as part of this was, you know, the goal is to make the township more walkable and more bikeable. They wanted to improve safety and accessibility and mobility throughout the town. They have a great downtown neighborhood, but you know, it's also served by, again, we still need to provide for vehicles, cars and trucks, but also, you know, South Orange is a transit hub. They have buses, commuter rail, jitneys and shuttles, as well as, you know, now again, providing for rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft. So, you know, their goal was to develop a plan to help them be more walkable and more bikeable, and make use of the other modes of transportation that are available to them. And, you know, we talk about multimodal access and creating a downtown area. You know, we know that through a number of studies, there's a direct relationship between walkability and complete streets and multimodal opportunities with economic development, you know, from a retail perspective, as well as making a town a place where people want to live, visit, and recreate, which in turn drives up property values, right? So the goal of this project was to develop an infrastructure, a transportation infrastructure that would help accommodate all of those things. Pam, next slide. So just for those of you who are not familiar with South Orange, it's a municipality which is due west of New York City, Jersey City, and Newark. 15 minutes to Newark and a half hour to Manhattan. So it's centrally located and has a lot of transportation and mobility options, as I mentioned before, but also is serviced by nearby interstates, I-280 to the north, I-78 to the south, and the Garden State Parkway, which runs north and south. For those who don't know, the Garden State Parkway in that section is restricted to cars only. So, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes and why that's important to understand. Next slide. About locally, South Orange, it's small, just under 3 square miles, but again, they have a strong downtown with mixed uses and a strong historic downtown character, highlighted by their gaslight street lamps. It is a home to the South Orange Performing Arts Center and Seton Hall University, as well as other schools, elementary schools, middle schools. And, through some of the data we've looked at, it's interesting that, almost 90% of the households have access to at least one vehicle, but only half of them use it to get to work, right? Again, it's an area where people can make use of other transportation options aside from driving. Pam, next slide. So how do we use Streetlight, and why did we use Streetlight? As we developed a project approach, we understood that there were some concerns by the South Orange stakeholders, and that was, providing access to the different transit services, but also developing standards for new transportation policies. They were concerned about cut-through traffic. They didn't have a way to really understand, again, given its location between Newark, Jersey City, and New York, Manhattan. They had a feeling that their town was being used as a cut-through for various trips, but they didn't really have a way to quantify that. So, as a transportation planner, how do you do that, right? Typically, we would look at, O&D surveys and circulation patterns, but the different options to do those surveys, right? License plate surveys or on-road interviews or mailings and questionnaires, they're all pretty expensive, or, in the case of the questionnaires, sometimes poor returns, so we were looking for other ways to capture this data, and that's where we kind of looked at Streetlight to solve, or at least to provide that information. So Pam, next slide, please. So for those who haven't used Streetlight, we were able to set up different zones as bases to understand where the vehicle trips were happening. And, we developed these, we had a number of iterations, and then we worked with South Orange and also with TED to help set up the zones that we have that you see here on the screen. And really the idea was to capture who was traveling through the town just as a pass through, but also who was traveling into the town. The train station is right in their downtown central business district, which is captured by the different zones of 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 there. So we wanted to get a little bit more detail about who was going where and how they were getting there. So one of the things we were able to do using Streetlight is limit the times that we collected the data. Again, it's, I think Pam and Ted will be able to speak to it a little later if you have questions, but we had the ability to go back and look at historical data. Again, that would be helpful now in the era of COVID when, we just saw traffic volumes are down. But we were able to really focus in on different time periods and days of the week that which we wanted to determine where those trips were happening. So as you can see, some of that data is listed on the side. We captured over those 3 days between 3 and 7, part of the data points that we developed, we looked at, analyzed as part of this. There were 70,000 data points in that time period. Of those, 58,000 gave us OND data. The other ones, Pam, if you go to the next slide, were trips. Whoops, I guess it's not that one. Trips that were created that started in one of the zones, but didn't end in didn't cross another plane. So it wound up, we're counting that as a network loss, and I think we have that on the next slide. But I wanted to show this slide, and this was something that Ted had spoken about earlier. This is the zone activity analysis showing the home residence locations. Again, that 1 kilometer square grid, and you can see that the majority of the trips originated from the bottom right corner of South Orange. So again, this is a two-dimensional way to show what Ted had shown earlier. So if you can go to the next slide, Pam. So these are just the aggregated numbers of what we saw and where they were going, and this is sort of the output results. And Pam, the next slide will provide our OND table, and you can see we're able to determine which trips were going through the town and which trips were stopping in town. So again, it gives us a good indication of how many trips were in the PM, at least, people who were going from the train station back home, and how they were, and the general direction in which they were going. In this particular chart, we were only highlighting those that were over 5%, and it accounted for 45% of all the trips within those five directional trips. The other thing we understood from the stakeholders, Pam, if you go to the next slide, is the prevalence of trucks. One of the things that Streetlight does allow is, Pam mentioned that it uses location-based services, so cell phones and things like that to collect the data. But what we wanted to do was specifically look at truck traffic. And one of the other pieces of data that's incorporated into Streetlight is the use of INRIX data. And for those who don't know, INRIX it's GPS data from fleet vehicles, mainly trucks. So we were able to kind of filter out some of the noise of all the vehicles and really just focus in on the truck traffic that was happening through the town. And really, you can take a look and see that the pass-through traffic, it was a significant amount of travel through the town. Now, it was interesting for me because I thought that a lot of it was going to be cut through traffic east to west, going from towns west of South Orange to Newark and Jersey City. But really what we found was that the majority of the trips, and including the truck trips, a large majority of the truck trips, were going north and south through South Orange to reach the interstates. And it should have made sense because, as I mentioned earlier, really the only other main north-south roadway would be the Garden State, most direct route would be the Garden State Parkway, and again, restricted to truck traffic, so they're going to find another way. So of those, you can see that 55% were the routes with the most common destinations through the town, and you know, we've anecdotally in talking with the stakeholders, you know, they're going pretty fast, and in an old historic town, as they're trucking down the road, they shake and rattle the old historic homes. So, you know, that's part of what we looked at in terms of some of, you know, in trying to develop recommendations. Pam, next slide, please. So again, just to, you know, as a simpler form, with an aerial as the background, we can see where those pass-through trips are happening, and how they were getting to and from the north and the south, showing by direction the volumes. So this is just a more simple version, but what I wanted to show as part of this is the next slide, Pam. In addition to the traffic, what we did look at was crash data. So what you're looking at, the graphic on the left, are the crashes, vehicle and pedestrian crashes that happened over the past 3 and 5 years respectively. And they line up pretty well with the vehicle, the cut-through traffic and high vehicle volumes, using South Orange as a pass-through. And that's the kind of results that we look at, and the data points that we need to develop those recommendations. So, you know, again, going back to data-driven safety, part of those recommendations were to focus in on these corridors, thinking about the types of things we can do to calm traffic through the central business district, through the residential neighborhoods. Again, even though some of those routes are county routes and are designated as truck routes, you know, they still have a significant impact on the quality of life of the people who live there. So part of our recommendations were, you know, and again, this would apply to any project where we would be doing the same type of analysis, you know, ways to traffic calm. And Pam, if you can just go to the next slide, you know, we looked at things where we narrow the roadway, or providing obstacles, you know, chicanes and curb extensions, things like that. But also, you know, we also looked at other ways to provide better pedestrian facilities and bike facilities. You know, recommendations are things like, you know, leading pedestrian intervals, where we're providing a not quite exclusive pedestrian phase, but we're providing a delay in traffic movement for pedestrians to establish themselves in the intersections or in the crosswalks, so that turning vehicles, when they have the opportunity to go, have greater opportunity to see them, and the pedestrians are more visible. Again, it's trying to develop safer opportunities for the pedestrians, and using other modes of transportation aside from cars. So, you know, given the amount of time, that's the presentation that I have, and you know, I'll be happy to answer any questions towards the end. Thank you.